So without further ado, this handsome gentleman here is myself. I'm Business Development Manager for Emerging Products, which is a flash way of saying salesman. And Keith here, we're very lucky to have today. He is actually Head of Innovation and Roadmap for Rivera. So, welcome, Keith.
Thank you.
As I mentioned before, I can appreciate you're probably subjected to quite a few of these launches and kickoffs in your time. So what we're looking to do today is keep this as close to an hour as we can, keep it short and sharp, but also have a wee bit of fun with it. We don't take ourselves too seriously, you can probably tell that by now. Up here is a quick list of what we hope to go through with you guys today. So context, what's happening in the market today, how that impacts with New Zealand, and how does Azure Stack by Cloud Creator fit within this particular context. Also why, a quick overview of Azure Stack by Cloud Creator and the problems that this solves. And also we have a very special guest from Dan's Financial Institution who will be joining us to go through a demo about how Azure Stack has solved a lot of these challenges experienced in the market today. So, you've probably had enough from me by now, so I'll pass you on to Keith.
Thanks, Dan. So, look, what I wanted to do before we get into the details of what Azure Stack is itself is just talk a little bit around the context that we see where this capability really fits in and contributes to the overall portfolio. So many of you will be well aware that we're now living in a multi-cloud world, and what I mean by that is that organizations are starting to consume different services from a number of different providers, things like email, CRM systems, maybe using a number of different hosting or cloud environments. And this is both locally and globally very much become the norm. And we expect that to very much stay the norm for an extended period of time. That whole focus of using the most relevant and most practical capability to deliver and address the workload requirements you have. Now, that's it's really great to be able to leverage all those different opportunities and choose which one is the most relevant for the particular workload you're looking at. But equally, if you end up kind of having a number of different environments that you're using for hosting or managing those workloads, it can start to become quite challenging to keep track of what's going on. Things like visibility of consumption, of utilization, of spend, of who's got access, and compliance can all start becoming difficult or increasingly more complex as you add additional providers into that mix. So really, we see the definition of hybrid cloud as being different from multi-cloud, and that multi-cloud is that environment where you're consuming from a number of places. Hybrid cloud we see as being a situation where you're doing that, but you're doing it with the help of some capabilities that make that able to be managed in a more seamless way. So you're getting more than the sum of the parts. You're operating across those environments as if they're all your own in your own data center. You've got visibility and centralized view and reporting. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go through, and some of the capabilities both in the Azure Stack and Cloud Creator space that help us out there. Jumping back to the higher level context, the other area that's increasingly common is that the rate of change is relentless. I'm sure you're all aware of that working in the technology industry, and it's only starting to accelerate more. So the challenge we find a lot of organizations are in is that on the one hand, they've got a lot of legacy line of business environments that need to be maintained, and in many cases they want to remediate or transform those. But oftentimes it's difficult to wait to go through that process or to remediate or transform those. You need to be able to start adopting the new innovative technologies as well, and you can't necessarily wait to rebuild or update all of your old applications. And that's another scenario that often drives hybrid cloud, and it's also a scenario that we believe is ideal for Azure Stack by Cloud Creator to assist in that situation. So we're going to cover off a little bit more around that. One of the big challenges for most organizations is they're not, all of their workloads aren't at the same generation, aren't at the same cloud maturity level. You know, you look at these amazing case studies of some of the global cloud providers. and they're all based around things like Netflix and Spotify. And the difference that those organisations have from all of our organisations is that they started from very nice green fields with all the latest technology. They were able to build everything in a cloud-first, serverless environment. But that's a luxury that most of us don't get the opportunity to enjoy very often, because there's always existing database and line of business servers that we need to maintain and update and continue to operate in. But we wanted to understand, how do we introduce great new mobile experiences, great new web experiences, while still maintaining those environments and hook it all together. So hopefully we'll give you a bit of a view of how Azure Stack can help with that as we go through today. So just bringing that down a little bit closer to the New Zealand context, certainly everything I talked about in the overall context is relevant here, but we have a few additional characteristics here, one of which is obviously our geographic isolation, which means that it's very unlikely that any of the large hyperscale global cloud providers are going to deliver their full capability and services out of New Zealand anytime soon, purely just from the scale perspective. I mean, they literally build out in tens of thousands of servers for one scale set. And another one, obviously, is that we have sovereignty and legislative requirements that need to be addressed and maintained. So we obviously have to appreciate those and figure those out, but also figure out how do we leverage the best of the capabilities from the public cloud environment. We want to totally be able to leverage those, but also make those relevant and fit in with our Kiwi organisations. So one of the ways, obviously, that we do this is with hybrid cloud. And as I mentioned earlier, we want an ability to manage across all of those different environments and make that more seamless, so we understand utilisation, spend, consumption, who's got access. And that's where Cloud Creator comes in. And I'm going to talk a little bit more and show you a little bit about that as we go through. So what is Azure Stack by Cloud Creator? Azure Stack is a capability that Microsoft have built up over the last number of years, and we've been actively engaged in the program from day one in an early adopter initiative with them. So we've been through the whole development process with them. We've had our engineers up in Redmond working with them on the development, and we've also been responsible for providing a lot of feedback and a lot of logging a lot of bugs and getting things fixed, providing input along the way. What Azure Stack is a scaled down instance of the same core code that runs in an Microsoft Azure global data center, but scaled down to a scale set that makes it much more relevant for service providers to host, particularly in a New Zealand context. And the idea from Microsoft's point of view is they appreciate that while they've got all these great capabilities in their global public cloud data centers, they also appreciate that many organisations have some of the challenges that I talked around earlier. They want to be able to integrate those services in with their existing environments. They may have data sovereignty challenges. They may be wanting to address situations like healthcare, where they may need some of the capabilities to actually physically be at the hospital, just purely from a latency and a disaster recovery perspective. So they want to be able to extend that cloud environment out to organisations where they need it, and to service providers to further build up their network and their capability. And fundamentally, Azure Stack is a franchise model. So it's very much a Microsoft prescribed, in fact, a Microsoft managed in terms of the core software layer deployment that we're able to host and operate out of our own data centers, and then build value-add services and capabilities around. Now, it is very different from traditional server operating system environment, so it's not just Windows Server with a few things added on top. It is actually the Azure, same Azure code base as runs in the data center. It supports all of the Azure storage models, which things like the traditional Windows Server product don't. Blob, queue, and tables. Thank you. I have a bit of a cold this morning, so I'm a little... Dan's going to help me out with prompting me occasionally. And it is completely code consistent with what they run in Azure. And what that means is all the great services they've built across on top of Azure are able to be ported down, and I'm going to show that as we jump into some of the demos.
I'll pick this one up, Keith. He seems to be ODing on LEMSIP at the moment, so we'll give him a bit of a break. As probably most of us are aware, everybody's kind of aware now of the benefits that cloud computing offer. So the CapEx, OpEx argument, the flexibility, the scalability. But how does Azure Stack fit within that, and what problems does it solve? So as Keith has mentioned before, due to New Zealand's geographical location and the legislative sort of challenges in terms of data sovereignty, latency concerns and things like that, Azure Stack fits in well as it's that onboard ramp to actual consuming public cloud in Azure. These points Keith has already gone through, so we'll quickly rip on to the next slides just for... Oh, yeah. Yeah, cool.
One other one I just want to pick up on there, and then we'll introduce you to a case study that we're going to work through to hopefully highlight some of this, is the DevOps capability. So many organisations are wanting to empower their teams to be more proactive and to be able to drive things themselves, and we'll talk about how we enable that. But obviously, when you're doing that, you want to be doing it in a way that's consistent and not specific to one environment and then having to do it in a different way in another cloud environment. And obviously, one of the great advantages of Azure Stack is that the API and all the capabilities around that are consistent between Azure Stack and Azure. So if you've got teams putting together processes and scripts with things like Chef or Puppet or Ansible, then those are all going to be compatible and able to be redeployed across both environments. So at this point, we're going to introduce our case study, which is Dan's Financial Institution. And we're lucky enough to have the CEO of Dan's Financial Institution today, and he's going to outline some of his business challenges for us.
You can tell I drew the short story here, can't you?
You'll need to.
Oh, yeah. Firstly, thank you, Keith, for having me here today. Bear with me.
Welcome.
Thanks. You just bear with me. We're a wee bit shy when it comes to public speaking, so I'll do my best. My name's Dan. I'm part of Dan's Financial Institution, and we do all of the financial stuff. So if you have any questions, come and speak to me afterwards. You can see here my board have given me a list of tasks that I need to adhere to and start to implement. One of those major ones is being budgetary concerns. They're quite keen on pulling back the budget for the IT department. And they've also started expressing slight concerns about our competitors and how they have started to utilize digital transformation and putting themselves slightly above us in the market. Finally, we want to look at the way in which our customers engage with us. We want to create new dynamic methods of them being able to provide feedback, us connecting with them, and also making sure that our experience is as good as possible for them. And finally, they want to start breaking into the Australian market. So we're doing really well in New Zealand, but we want to start thinking a little bit more globally and approaching that appropriately. To give you a little bit of feedback about my particular situation, Keith, my CEO read an article about Agile and now has said that we need to implement that across the company. So we are starting to adopt Agile DevOps. Also, we have obviously the financial regulations in terms of the Financial Markets Authority. So we have strict concerns about data sovereignty being kept on shores within New Zealand. We've also got co-located legacy workloads that are quite fairly complex in their environments that we also want you to help us out in terms of reimagining how we can utilize that. Keith, can you help me, please?
Thanks, Dan. Well, that's quite a list of challenges, but they're quite consistent with a number of other customers that we've spoken to. So yeah, absolutely, we want to help you out there. And the process that we would use is to engage our Cloud Creator Radar team, who are our specialists in cloud adoption. But what they do first is identify what your requirements are, and you've been quite great in being able to quite succinctly articulate those, so thank you. And we work through that whole design, build, run focus, and then continue on with the ongoing optimization. So that's the process we're going to employ here. And so where we're starting from is, as you've outlined, we have you have a number of environments that you're currently co-locating, and they are running on some hardware which is nearing end of life. There's some complicated software licensing that you want to avoid having to renew because you feel like you've contributed enough to keeping Larry's yacht afloat. So we need to figure out how to migrate you off that platform, but do it in a way that doesn't impact your business as we go through. Also, we're obviously aware, as you mentioned, of your requirements to have some of that data needs to be, for legislative reasons, kept in country. So the first step we would recommend for you, Dan, and for your organisation is to build out an Azure Stack instance locally in New Zealand, or build out some capabilities on our Azure Stack instance. And the reason we would do this is obviously to provide that low latency connection to your existing workloads, because we're going to have a period of coexisting. We don't want to go for a big bang, high risk migration, so we can coexist those two environments and provide that low latency, but also that will provide the data sovereignty legislative requirements that you need for your financial markets and Reserve Bank compliance. But equally, we can start making use of some of the new capabilities in there. I heard you were keen to better engage digitally more with your customers, so we're going to help you out there by starting to use some of the cloud capabilities within Azure Stack. So to show you what that looks like, I'm just going to jump in and actually have a look at some of the environments that we're going to help build up for Dan.
So while Keith goes through this seamless transition that we've been practicing ages for, the whole premise of Azure Stack by Cloud Creator is it's self-provision. It empowers you guys to be able to do this within your own companies if you have the skills and the expertise to do so. If we jump back to that previous diagram in terms of the design, build, run piece, that's when you can start leveraging expertise of CCL, of Rivera, of Spark, who have been doing this now for a very long time in terms of migrating people off their on-premise instances into their data centers. So they have a lot of IP around how to do that, how to transform and reimagining what your existing stuff looks like. So that whole, the whole premise of this is, yes, it is self-sufficient in that you guys can do it yourself, but it is also, there is help for you guys to help understand how your existing workloads can be articulated into that digital world.
Great, thanks, other Dan. What I've got here is two screens running. So one, and I've made them slightly different colour so we can kind of differentiate them. One is Azure Stack running out of our Alexandra Road Trentham data centre, and the other one is Microsoft Azure, and the data centre that we're going to be primarily using there is Australia East, because we think that's the most common scenario for most Kiwi organisations. But I'll talk through the ability to extend beyond that for organisations that want to. As you'll notice, they're obviously very similar user interfaces, and that's because they're running the same code base. There's obviously a little bit of difference in terms of the number of capabilities and services available, but I'll talk through that a little bit more as we go through. So, as with Microsoft Azure, we support resource groups in Azure Stack, and the reason you have resource groups is to be able to break down and provide a very granular level of management and control across the resources that you set up and provision within Azure Stack. And it also means you can delegate roles and rights to different groups. So if you want to be able to have DevOps teams and confidently give them access to certain areas and not other areas, that's a key way of doing that. And that also flows through, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later on, it also flows through to the way we manage that those workloads within Cloud Creator, or have that visibility of what's going on. So the first thing we're going to do for Dan's financial services is we're going to set up a new server environment for them, and we're going to click on the right button, which will be good. And what this is going to demonstrate is one of the key benefits we get from Azure Stack being part of that global Microsoft Azure ecosystem. So what you're seeing here is something that's called marketplace syndication. So for those of you that have used Azure before, you'll know that there's a lot of great appliance and pre-configured environments already set up in the Azure marketplace. And with Azure Stack, we also are able to access those without having to make any changes for those. We simply choose which ones we want to syndicate down, and those become available to the customers within Azure Stack without needing to do anything there. So already we're seeing the the benefits of that consistency between the two platforms. So what I'm going to do in this case is provision a new environment for Dan to run his billing system on. And what I'm doing here is picking a virtual machine scale set, which is a automatically scalable set of virtual machines that are going to run a workload. And I'll talk you through a little bit more as we go into that. We're going to do it on Windows. Normally we have normally we have a Microsoft person along as well to run through this. So I normally go diligently through and pick all the Windows options. So today I could probably go a bit rogue, apart from the fact that we're being videoed. So we'll just edit that bit out.
I think that was a tactical decision by Mike. Make sure you're sticking to the script.
Indeed. Okay, so we're going to create a virtual server scale group here called billing, and the most fun part of the day is that our very scrupulous engineers have enforced very strong passwords on me even for the demo environment.
Security first, Keith, is massive importance for Dan's financial institution. And we normally have a bit of a sweepstake here on whether Keith manages to type the same password twice. So far he's done pretty well, but I tried to jinx them, sorry.
You did.
Yeah.
I don't know if it lets you copy and paste, actually. There we go. Then what we're going to do is we're going to use an existing resource group, which I created earlier. And as you can see, the location's Wellington, indicating that we're provisioning onto Azure Stack rather than into one of the Azure data centers. Now, there is a reason I'm going through all of this, and it is to show you some of the cool features you get as you go through. Firstly, with the marketplace syndication. The other thing here is you're seeing it's building out right through to deploying publicly in the DNS. It's associating with a public IP. It's also building out firewall rule set. So I'll show you that as you go through. How many instances do we want in our scale sets? Obviously, we can change that later on as well and increase or decrease that number of instances. And then the other thing that we get, which is again consistent, fully consistent with Microsoft Azure, is we get the t-shirt sizes to choose, and it comes up with a few recommended ones, but we can equally decide to go and view all and choose whichever ones that we think are most appropriate. And again, those can obviously be changed and scaled later on as we go. I detected that due to his heritage, Dan may be somewhat frugal of nature, so we're going to go...
That's a risky comment, considering where we are today, but that's fine.
So we're going to go with...
Racist comment, but it's all good.
We're going to go with a D1 V2, and at this point I will point out that I also come from a Scottish background. I just don't have the accent to prove it like Dan. And go ahead and provision that. Now, like all good cooking shows, I prepared one earlier so that we don't have to wait for that to finish. But in the meantime, which I'll show you as we go through, but the other thing we're going to do, and again just to show the power of the whole marketplace capability, is one of the requirements Dan had was to stand up, to have better interaction with his clients. So we're going to stand up a WordPress blog appliance for him, and again, I don't have to know how to do that. This one actually runs on Linux. Dan's teams don't need to understand how that works because someone's already done all the effort in building that appliance up and stuck it in the Azure Marketplace, and we've just been able to pick that up. So we're going to go ahead and create that as well. And we get the joy of typing the passwords again.
Safe drinks from me tonight,
mate. And we're going to put that into the marketing resource group. And again, we're going to deploy that into the Wellington. And we'll go for let's go for an A1 standard. Let's just be exorbitant today. So again, that's going to go ahead and provision. So what I'm going to do while that's obviously we're also agreeing to WordPress's terms and conditions and things as we go through here as well. So what I'm going to do is just show you one of those we created earlier. And what's cool about this is you'll see here that the one I created earlier is up and running, but what it's also done is published as part of that same build process, and this will be happening with the one I just deployed. It automatically sets up the firewall rules and external access for that with just the appropriate rules for the particular appliance that I deployed, which was WordPress, so with just the ports open that I need. And it publishes that out to the internet. And in the case of the virtual machine scale set that I provisioned earlier, it also sets up load balancing, which I'll show you in a minute once that's finished provisioning. Now, this sort of stuff's, when you just see it go through like that, that just seems pretty obvious and easy. But if you think of that in a more traditional environment, what we've done there and the number of probably teams and calls to help desks or logging requests and the time frame to get through and do those, building out those operating system instances. You provision the virtual machines, but someone still has to build out the operating system on that, configure it, get it the same on all of your scale set instances, and then work on the load balancing and how that works, figure out what firewall rules, and all of that's just been pre-configured with these templates. So a real advantage to getting things done consistently. As I say, you can script all of this stuff. I'm choosing to use the user interface for the purpose of the demos, but we could be doing this also with things like Chef or Puppet that the organisation can choose to drive themselves, whichever method they want, and just use the PowerShell API that comes with Azure, which is the same one that comes with Azure Stack. I just really quickly jump in to the billing one just to see how that one we started provisioning earlier was going. It's not quite finished yet, so what I'm going to show you later on is just how it's built out some capabilities around high availability and the ability to set up health probes, but we'll come back to that once it's finished provisioning. So at this point what we're going to do is we're going to jump back and see how our good friend Dan is doing. Sorry, did I need to give you more of a cue there too?
Brilliant, Keith. I'm thrilled. Thank you so much for helping me out there. The guys have been super productive, almost too productive in fact, as my CFO there is going off his nut. You can see he's received a bill and he's a wee bit in shock about the cost. He was expecting that this whole operation would save us money. It is in fact costing us a wee bit more. So Keith, is there any way in which we can sort of begin to control and understand how we can utilise this better, please?
Indeed, there is. So, look, the scenario you mentioned there is not uncommon when organisations first start feeling the ease and the ability to go through and you get a little bit of that initial kind of burst of cloud creep. But what we've done is build in within Cloud Creator a whole bunch of capabilities to help with that scenario. And what we're really trying to do here is find, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about what Cloud Creator is for those of you who may not know, but what we're trying to do is find that nice balance between providing controls for the organisation to make sure that they don't get bill shock or people having access to things that they shouldn't, but not get to the point where it's limiting people from getting things done in an efficient way. So it's finding that right balance and being able to delegate. And one of the ways of doing that is obviously using quite granular role controls and building out different resource groups and different clouds within Cloud Creator to manage that. So what I'm going to do now is just jump in and have a look. And so the first thing we've done here, you'll see, is we're pulling through. So Cloud Creator, I should mention, is our overall cloud management and visibility environment. And what the goal here is, as organisations consume from a number of different sources, be they global public clouds, be they capabilities like Homeland Cloud or like Polaris, all of those capabilities can be viewed from one location. And our real focus there is on certain personas, and the persona we've focused on the most at the moment has been the financial visibility and control. So rather than someone that's wanting to keep track of that, having to understand all these different environments, having to understand maybe a vSphere platform, understanding the Azure console, understanding the AWS console, we're bringing all of that pertinent information back into a central place. We're also doing that with some of the other areas that are more common, so that teams can not need to relearn every time they go through. And that gives us the ability to provide a centralized place to control and view that access. So what you're seeing here is that we've, this particular account within Cloud Creator has been linked up to both our Microsoft Azure subscription and an AWS subscription, and it's pulling that information into a single place for that visibility of what's going on. It gives us the ability, we're doing an Azure demo, so I'll demo on there, to also provide some management and controls on those different devices, which would look like that. And how we do this is we simply add in the existing subscriptions and accounts an organisation may have with those hyperscale cloud providers, so that they're able to pull, the information is pulled through from the APIs on those providers. And the other benefit here is that we're able to provide a centralized single bill across all of those environments as well. And in terms of the financial controls that we're talking around earlier, one of the key things we do is provide that sort of level of visibility on our centralized dashboard view. So here you're seeing obviously a graph of some cloud spend, and we're able to also drill down and look, say, just at the Azure spend, or see spend for across a number of providers. I think someone's been buying some Kindle books or something there. And obviously also any in-country cloud platforms that you're using would appear there, and you can drill down. There's obviously a load more reporting that can be viewed in here as well. And there's also some quite detailed reports that we can run, customized reporting that can be exported out to Excel or to PDFs as well through this customized reporting capability here. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but there's a number of different ones. And there is one other thing I want to show you, which I need to show you over on this other screen, which looks like it's logged out, probably because I logged in too early. So, oh no, we're back. So hopefully you're starting to see what we're trying to do here is not replace the functionality in the native cloud environments that we're provisioning or managing, but we're trying to pull that information together in a consistent way that provides some controls. It means that the person doing the monitoring for those environments doesn't necessarily need to understand how those particular cloud environments work, because that's not what they're doing. They're looking to provide the overall control. So I'm just waiting for this to reload. And what I want to show you in here is a concept we have called delegated financial authority. So what we've got here is 3 different levels of spend control that we can delegate to teams or individuals across different cloud resources. And we can actually have a lot more than 3. I've just got 3 in this particular demonstration. So obviously we have 2 built-in ones. 0, which means that every request someone does needs to be approved by someone else, or unlimited, which obviously speaks for itself. And then you're able to create a number of those in between with different levels. For example, $600 approval limit, or if that doesn't meet my needs, I can add as many more as I like with different spend limits, and I can then go ahead and associate those with the appropriate people within the organisation. So this helps us gain a lot more granularity and control across the spend and capabilities. And what's also unique about this is that we have, within Cloud Creator, we have the concept of provider clouds. So provider clouds are the likes of Microsoft Azure, the likes of Azure Stack, the likes of our our own Homeland Cloud platform, and we're currently working with CCL to get the Polaris platform integrated into Cloud Creator as well. And once you have those things like delegated financial authority set up, as you add new provider clouds, that just automatically works across. You don't have to set all that up again, because that spend control applies regardless of the cloud that you're trying to do. So rather than having to build out some of those controls in each individual proprietary cloud interface, there's one central place you can do it. So I'll leave it at that, but hopefully that gives you a bit of a view, and hopefully it reassures my canny friend a little bit about where things are going for his organisation.
Brilliant. I'm thrilled. Keith, you've got the CFO off my back. You can see now he's actually away on holiday. He's set his DFAs, he's set his limits so he can take a wee bit of a break. But it's always one thing after another, sadly, with Dan's financial institution. Our board member has come back and said one of the things that we wanted to achieve was to start to break out and start to adopt global Azure and begin to break into the Australian market there. Now, is there any way in which you can help me achieve this, please?
I sure can. Would you like me to show you that?
Yes, please.
Cool. So you'll remember to date what we've done for your organisation, Dan, is that we have... hello, other Dan. We have built out an Azure Stack instance, and we've extended some of that cloud functionality, but we've kept it, for latency reasons and data sovereignty reasons, we've kept it close to your original deployment. But what we're going to do now is we're going to build out a virtual network gateway, and we're going to extend across a virtual private network into the Azure Australia East data centre, which is in Sydney, and we're going to be able to start building out some capabilities and resources for you there. Now, this is going to enable us to put things like your website and the mobile apps that you want to use to deliver to your new Australian customers that you're seeking closer to them, so they get a better experience and user experience there, but also still enables us to link back to the environments that we have on the Azure Stack environment, and right through back to a legacy environment if we need to, as we migrate off that environment. So let me just quickly show you a little bit of how that works. So the first thing we're going to do is have a look at, we've got a requirement to extend, to build a web and mobile front end for Dan's financial services accounting environment into the Australian market. But we want to leverage the existing service scale set that we built up here. And you'll see we have a database server there too that we want to use. So what we're going to go ahead and do, and I took the liberty of doing this earlier so you don't have to watch me type again, is we're going to set up a virtual network gateway, and you'll see it there, which links from our Azure Stack environment through to the Sydney data centre, which is the 104 IP address that you see there. And what that does is extends a virtual private network, and you'll see that connection here, across from our Azure Stack environment through to the Sydney data centre, and correspondingly we do the same thing at the other end. So if I jump into the resource group for Dan's Financial Services Australia, I can see that I have a connection there which is connected through in the opposite direction and is also live and running. So this can start with being over a VPN connection, which is secured, but it's permanently up, so effectively becomes a network. And in the very near-term roadmap for Azure Stack is the ability to support ExpressRoute, which means that we can do a more fixed bandwidth, predictable bandwidth requirement as well. So that then enables us to start extending services, and then what we're going to do is just build out a a new mobile app here, and as you'll see, the experience is very similar to what we would have expected when we were building out on Azure Stack. We would simply go through and choose where we deploy the environment in Dan's Finance and give it a name and go ahead and provision in our Azure environment. So just while we're here, we'll quickly jump back and have a look at what we provisioned earlier in the billing environment, because I just wanted to show you that virtual machine scale set. And one of the cool things I just wanted to highlight here, again, is that things like automatic updates of the operating system are just automatically configured. This is the virtual machine scale set I just provisioned earlier. And again, that's smart enough to understand that because I've provisioned a number of instances, they need to stagger things like application updates. We've also got the ability to, within the load balancer, to do things like setting up health probes, and we're going to talk a little bit more about those going forward, but that's the ability to ensure that the servers are not only up, but they're actually responding in the way we would expect with the application. And then there's obviously the ability to script and automate actions in the event that something goes wrong, which we're going to cover off in a little bit. So hopefully that's demonstrated how we can now quite easily in a consistent way extend out from our initial environment within Azure Stack out to start leveraging some of the global capabilities of Microsoft Azure, and that may be services that aren't currently available in Azure Stack, because obviously some of the things like machine learning and artificial intelligence, which use massive amounts of scale, are obviously not ported down to Stack at this point, possibly won't be. Also, it gives you that global reach. We've demonstrated it with Australia, but I could equally be using one of the data centers in Europe or the US and linking those through as well. So we'll jump back in and check in with our good friend at Dan's Finance again and see how he's going.
Thanks, Keith. You guys are really doing a great job for us, and we're thrilled. Sadly, I caught up with one of the developing team leads today, and the complexity of the environment now, due to the fact that it extends out, is getting a little bit too much for them to manage. Is there any way in which you can sort of help us rejuvenate and upskill our guys? I've got strict budgetary requirements and headcount people, so I can't bring on anybody else new in order to help us do that. Is there any sort of thing that we can do to help us out, please?
Sure thing. Yeah, we'd love to do that and help you out there. We have a capability called Cloud Creator Radar, which is what we've identified as over many years of CCL and Revera helping customers move from their existing environments through to utility compute, pay-as-you-go scalable environments. We've built up a massive amount of intellectual property across the group in helping customers transform their environments. And we looked at, well, how can we apply this and make this relevant to organisations looking to move into public cloud environments? And many of the capabilities and skills and processes are equally relevant in that environment. We're also investing heavily on training our folk across the environment, the hyperscale cloud environments. So that really builds into that, as I talked about earlier, that whole design, build, run, optimize model that we have. And we have a number of different offerings available within that space, depending on the level of support or assistance that your organisation wants, and depending on their the capabilities you have in-house. And many times, particularly if it's a development environment, for example, you may want to just let you guys focus on that. You want them to be doing more dev and less ops, so we can be the ops and your DevOps.
Much like your focus is ultimately your customer experience of the service that you're providing, Very sort of similar thing with CCL Rivera and the team at Spark. We want you guys to be focusing on the right thing. So how do you engage with your customers? How do you give them the best overall experience rather than having to worry about the ongoing updates and things like that that happen behind the scenes? The whole purpose of this particular framework is that final piece at the top there, that evolve. So the maintain is to make sure that it stands up and it doesn't fall over, and if it does, we fix it for you. Optimize is obviously utilising new cloud services. It's not a case of just being able to spin it up and walk away. It's being able to tailor that and make it more efficient to work harder for you, so you really gain the benefits of utilising the particular strengths within cloud. And finally, that evolve piece ties in quite nicely to down here, discovering what your companies are trying to achieve, what your goals and objectives are. If we can articulate that at a business level, it means when all these new features and stuff that are constantly getting released into the market, as Keith mentioned before, that rate of change is quite high. When these new features and stuff come in, you guys don't need to worry about that, because we understand where it is you guys are trying to go. We can then come out and say, hey, this new feature has been released and we think it will enable you to achieve your goal a lot quicker or a lot more cost efficient. So that's the whole purpose of being able to lean back and sort of, you don't have to do this all yourselves. You can rely on the partnerships that you've built with CCL, with Rivera and with Spark in order to help you optimize your experience moving forward. Hello. All right.
We'll just have a seamless transition of Dan's here.
How's it going? Yeah, pretty good, thanks.
And we're going to check in with Dan and see how things are going in his organisation.
You're a handsome fellow, and yourself. Thank you very much, Keith.
You're welcome as always.
Perfect. So we can see here the Cloud Creator Men and my team leader in cahoots. They are absolutely ripping up and pulling up trees and becoming very productive and helping our guys understand how to best utilize our new environment that we've built. But once again, the board have come back and said, we've just witnessed Cyclone Gita rip through New Zealand. There's been earthquakes. We're a bit worried about our DR capability. Is there any way in which we can start to utilize this hybrid environment so I can begin to alleviate some of my board's concerns and take the pressure and stress off my life? Keith?
We certainly can. As we've kind of demonstrated a little bit when we helped expand your business out into the Australian market, once you're in the Azure stack and the Azure environment, we have the ability to leverage the capabilities of the cloud in a number of different locations. So one of the options that we can do is build out highly available or resilient services from our own data centers in the Azure stack world through to Microsoft Azure data centers. So we'll demonstrate a number of ways that works. Now, one of the great things around this is that depending on how quickly you want the workloads to come back online, if you can tolerate just a few minutes for the machines to start up, then you don't actually need to pay for the compute time in the disaster recovery site until you actually power those machines on. And that can all be scripted and automated, and obviously it's just usually just a few minutes for those to spin up from powered off state into an operating state. Obviously you also have the ability to have those in warm or hot standby mode as well, but then they'll incur compute charges. So again, it's a case-by-case basis, looking at the application workload, determining how many minutes are acceptable for it to be out versus the cost of maintaining that environment. So what we're going to do here for a little bit of a change of pace is beam in one of our colleagues who is an expert in our radar team and who doesn't currently have a cold. Actually, I think he did when he recorded this video. And we're just going to quickly look through part of this video where he's going to demonstrate what I talked about earlier with some of the probes and being able to automate that process.
First thing you'll note is that we're not just running this website off a VM, we're running it off a virtual machine scale set. So the purpose or mission of a virtual machine scale set is for the scale set instances or VMs will all be delivering and supporting a common workload. So in our case, it's an IIS site with a website hosted on that. So they're all just a group of machines with a common purpose, and we can scale these up and down and left and right. So what I mean by that is we can scale them up and down in terms of size, and we can scale them out in terms of count as well. So very easy to change the size of the VM profile in a scale set. We simply choose our new size and reallocate. So moving on, the purpose of this demo is to demonstrate high availability. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to stop and deallocate the scale set. But first let's have a little look at how it's delivered locally. So within our scale set we've got a load balancer. The load balancer basically watches both VMs in the array and only allocates requests to those VMs. So our load balancer has got a public IP address on the front end, and we can see that we've also got a backend pool consisting of our 2 VM instances serving up the web address. We've also got the health probes, which I've just briefly described, which keep monitoring each website on each VM to make sure that it's up, and that request should be genuinely passed back to that site. So without further ado, I'm going to now stop and deallocate our VM scale set, and then that'll give us an opportunity to observe the automation magic that's occurring behind the scenes, and we'll see why very shortly, that why we're able to achieve constant uptime even though we've stopped and deallocated. So the site will go down. It'll go down for about 5 minutes while the automation happens, and I'll pause the video for that time. Okay, so welcome back, and now as the administrator of Dan's website, I've received an email saying that our web app has failed at 4 locations for 5 minutes. So this is from our Application Insights account. Our Application Insights are continuously watching our Traffic Manager URL to make sure that our website's up and running. And if it's not up and running, then it does something. So what does it do? Well, the result of that you can see here. So here is our virtual machine scale set in public this time. In Azure Public, we've got the same footprint, the same virtual machine scale set with the same load balancer configuration, and it's for some reason these 2 instances have started themselves up. Now let's have a little look at why. So we'll begin with the AV monitor, and here is the availability monitor we've configured, and we can see it's not looking too happy or healthy with the red dots showing up there. That's a sign that we've got a bit of a problem. And if we go into edit the test, we can see that it's testing from 5 locations, these 5 here around the world. We're looking for a HTTP response of 200, which means OK, and give us an alert in the event that it fails at 4 out of 5 locations around the world. So you'll see that it's started to come back up now because our virtual machines in public are started up. But what does it do when it can't? It uses this webhook here to call on our Azure automation account to perform some actions. Let's have a look at that. So here's our Azure automation account, and we've created a runbook here, which is what you saw being called by the webhook, and this runbook's called Start VMSS. And if we just have a little look at the contents, what we've done here is we have used a...
So we'll leave it at that for the moment. We're going to put this video up on our website. So, but what I just wanted to recap there, obviously feel free to watch more of that if you want the extra detail, but hopefully what was demonstrated there was the ability to use some of the monitoring and automation that's inherently built into Microsoft Azure to pick up the fact that those websites went down on the Azure Stack environment, and therefore to kick off some automated scripts and processes that didn't need any human intervention, or could do depending on what your choice is, to bring those back up in Azure Public, and there was only a short outage or delay. Now there could be no outage at all if you had the active warm site running, but obviously the example that was demonstrated there was spinning the workloads up, which means they wouldn't have been incurring any cost up until the point, apart from the storage cost, up until the point that they were spun up. So it is a very powerful environment there. So one of the things I just quickly wanted to show there that he was mentioning is the ability to monitor, and you'll see in this diagram here that obviously you can monitor from across all of the Azure data centers as well, so that you can make sure that you're not just monitoring your environment from one place, because if the monitoring is then the single point of failure, if the monitoring goes down, then you might not pick up. You can actually monitor from all the locations. That can also be really useful in a situation like with Dan's Finance, where they're extending out to other countries, because they can monitor their response times and things across different environments. And all of those capabilities and the automation obviously can also be applied to Azure Stack, because the API is consistent. So we'll leave that at that for now. Hopefully that gave you a bit of an idea how we can leverage the power of the public Azure cloud to extend and provide high availability in DR, some of which I think I need myself right now.
Yeah. All right, guys, final straight. You still with us? Won't be long now. Keith isn't. He's done. Right. I'll pick it up from here. So a quick summary of success. Dan's financial institution and Azure Stack by Cloud Creator. So we've aligned our business and technical goals. We understand what it was we were trying to achieve, and we improved productivity via control. That was the delegated financial authority piece. And we've also begun to investigate and maximize the efficiency and capability of the hybrid cloud. Also power through partnerships. So not only are we partnering with Microsoft to achieve this and other providers, you guys have the opportunity to start leveraging expertise that CCL provide, that Rivera provide, that Spark provide. So if you do have the in-house capabilities to do this, absolutely go for it. It's been designed to be able to do that. But also if you have any questions or you need any help about it, that's why we're here to help you do that as well. So then what's next for us? Normally this is when we have a Microsoft representative here, but Keith might have to put on a costume and pretend to be that for us at this stage. The current look for the future, we can see here we've got the current capabilities. So we've got the basic, like Keith said before, the core tenants that make up public Azure are now hosted within New Zealand. So we've got the compute, we've got the various storage choices, Key Vault, etc., etc. Now, phase 2 development, we've already got underway. And phase N development, also, what we want to do with this is do a lot of customer engagements to figure out the things that you're wanting to see integrated within Azure Stack as we move forward, because ultimately you're the people that will be using it. And also, this will rely a little bit on our engagements with Microsoft moving forward. Have you got anything you want to say about that? Yep.
So we have worked quite closely, as I said, with Microsoft on this over an extended period of time as part of the early adopters initiative. So we're quite heavily involved, and in fact, one of the first service providers globally to have live customers on the platform. We have a number of healthcare organisations actually utilising the platform, and Gareth, who's here today, can talk to you a little bit more about those when we finish up, if you like. There's also some information up on our website. The next step we're very much kicking into now, and as with all of these cloud platforms, the public cloud platforms with Cloud Creator and with Azure Stack, there's kind of no point where it's we say right, that's finished, that's done. We're constantly iterating and adding new capabilities. So at the moment, we're with the guys working hard on phase 2, which is the app services and the SQL as a service into Azure Stack, going beyond that, there's a published roadmap from Microsoft. So if you have a look at Azure, Microsoft Azure, if you Google or maybe Bing, but Google Azure roadmap, and then you can filter on Azure Stack. It shows you all of the feature set and capabilities. So it's quite an extensive list of features and capabilities that are being ported across. So some of you may be familiar with the first iteration of Azure Stack, which was Windows Azure Pack. This is a very different beast in that Microsoft are very strategically aligned behind it. They have identified very much that this is a huge competitive advantage, having a hybrid cloud capability over their global hyperscale competitors. who don't have a similar capability. And it does certainly provide them an edge, particularly, I think, with more established organisations. They're not born in the cloud, the ones that aren't, the worlds that we typically live in, where we're dealing with a mix of existing line of business applications, and with scenarios like public sector and healthcare, where we need to potentially have things very local for that immediacy that those to drive. So they do have an extensive roadmap going forward. It's something we're working closely with them on to understand, to provide input on, but also we're very committed to delivering those capabilities as soon as they're available. Now, it is a very prescribed appliance model. This isn't just something that you can stand up on any old server you like. There is a demo environment, but the actual proper scale-out Azure Stack model that we're running, there's only a very select number of server models from, at this stage, only 3 hardware vendors that support it. And one of the reasons for that is to make sure that maximum reliability and consistency, so they have a lot of confidence when they're deploying patching out into the environment that it's going to work. It's not like having to support thousands of combinations of different servers and network drivers. It's a very prescribed appliance model. The Azure Resource Manager model, which is the key part of it, is actually completely managed by Microsoft, and all of the updates for that, even on our Azure Stack deployment, are managed by them. So as I said earlier, it is very much an appliance model and a franchise model. So look, we're confident that there's a very strong future here, and that this product's going to be continued to be extended. Why that is relevant for you is that if you're making bets and investing in processes and building things out like Chef or Puppet capabilities to automate workflows to get your teams developing those processes, you want to be doing that on something that's got longevity, that's going to have new features and functionality added as it goes through.
Okay, guys, what next? So at the moment, we're offering a free discovery workshop. So part of the battle of knowing where you're going is knowing what you're starting with, which can be quite a challenge in some instances. So what we're doing is we're offering a free discovery workshop where we get some guys in to run some tools over selected workloads to establish exactly what they look like. And then the next step from that is understanding how they can be reimagined in a digital environment. If you have any questions about it, feel free to go and speak to your account managers at CCL, at Spark, at Rivera. They're here to help. Also, if you have any direct questions, feel free to email us with the email address provided. There will be further supplementary presentations to this, webinars, and a far more technically orientated workshop that will be run throughout the country. There's one specifically up in Auckland. We're flying in a Microsoft black belt, as they like to call themselves, to help upskill you guys and understand how you can begin to leverage this at a technical level. Finally, I just want to thank CCL, Rivera and Spark for inviting us down here, and also for yourselves for having us. Dunedin's a very important part of what we're trying to do here. So again, thank you very much for your time. We hope we've been engaging. If you have any questions, shout out. Otherwise, feel free to ask any of the representatives here today. Okay, thanks guys, appreciate it.
If you've got any questions you want to cover off while we're here?
So the billing, when I did my bill at the end of the month, I need a bill from Microsoft and a bill from you guys?
So I'll just repeat the questions because we're videoing this session. So the question is around the billing. So will you receive one bill from Microsoft and one bill from us? No, typically what happens is, so the billing for Azure Stack actually does go through Azure. But what we do is, if you have an existing Azure subscription, or otherwise we'll create you an Azure subscription, we get the authority to be able to manage that subscription for you, so that we're able to provide you that one bill for both your Microsoft Public Azure and your Azure Stack utilization on that single bill. And the primary mechanism we do for that is the CSP model, which is the cloud service provider model, which gives you the pay-as-you-go capability for all of the Azure services, rather than needing to kind of prepay up front, which is now the kind of preferred model. So we're able to provide that single bill through and show the consumption, the current consumption will show on a daily updated basis, or even more granular for Azure within Cloud Creator 2 if you choose to view those dashboards in there. So hopefully that answers that question. Any other questions for us at the moment? Or
would you expect customers to save money by moving to the stack?
So just to position that, so the question was, would we expect customers to save money by moving to the stack? Certainly, moving to the cloud, there's a number of things there. The way you use it is often part of that. So there's a lot of capabilities that it introduces to enable you to power off, scale down, scale up. So you really need to start working the cloud to get the maximum benefit there. I mean, it really depends what platform you're on now, but what I can tell you is that the Azure Stack model, our pricing for the various t-shirt sizes that we saw on the screens as we went through is consistent with the Australia East pricing, so nearly identical in most cases. There's a few that vary slightly just based on the way the architecture works and the different scale sizes, but so that pricing is very consistent with what you would expect from there. So the next step is really where we need to get into, and I appreciate not all workloads can be scaled down or powered off, but we need to really get into that optimization, looking at what workloads can do. That's where you get some of the benefits of the cloud by really working it in and getting that cost optimization in, and that's part of the process that we can help with that radar capability. So I guess to answer the original question, it's kind of hard to know without knowing where you are now, but certainly we can help cost optimize and introduce the benefits of the scalability and elasticity there. Hey.
The modelling of the costs that you mentioned before and the delegated financial authority controls, because you've got things like, I want X number of CPUs and this much memory, that sort of thing, which is easy to predict and cost at that point when you're doing approvals and modelling the costs. But does that allow you to forecast volume, like variable type costs in there, say?
So I'll tell you what we're working on at the moment, and hope maybe that'll help answer the question. So the first one, which is, as I showed you, was a control of how much you can provision. What's in the near-term roadmap in Cloud Creator is also the ability to control that for either an individual or a team, to cap the overall spend, which would mean if the service grew or the spend grew after post-deployment. The modelling is definitely an area in our future roadmaps as well. It's a little bit more difficult to kind of predict because obviously it varies a lot depending on and some of that would need to work with the customer to understand the characteristics of the workload, because you're going to understand how your database or your storage may grow more than we are, because your applications. So that is certainly the types of areas we've got in the future roadmap for Cloud Creator, along with things like compliance and SLA checking, so that you can tag workloads and make sure that they maintain compliant. What I will say there is that we are constantly keen to hear suggestions and recommendations, and that's a really great one. And we're actually just putting together a forum around that, which we can get some details out to you as well. So, because we'd love to get input from people to make it a better tool. So, sorry, hopefully I've partly answered that question for you.
No, the reason was the question 2 or 3 years ago, I saw a number of companies jump into cloud and then get absolutely burned on a number of fronts and do a sort of strategic withdrawal. So I suppose, where would you say we are on the Gartner hype cycle with this stuff? I wouldn't say we're not in the pure hype cycle anymore.
No,
Are we at the productivity, plateau of productivity, or where it is?
look, I think we are starting to see quite mass adoption of these capabilities by established existing organisations, which I think moves them well beyond the hype scale. I mean, these capabilities are very real and practical for organisations, and as I said, they a lot of the early adoption engagement was by organisations that were building, new startups that were building, particularly around digital media and things that were building cloud first. But the rapid growth we've seen in the last couple of years, and I think particularly in the growth we're seeing in public Azure over the last year, which has been quite phenomenal growth, is being driven now by that second wave of kind of more enterprise adoption. And I think part of that, I think personally that well and truly proves that we've moved past that phase. But I would go back to one of the key things around this is that it is a constant optimization process, whereas we used to kind of size IT and we'd put it in and then that would be it. You'd buy the server and you left it running for 3 years. You didn't need to adjust it. We do need to maximise and optimise cloud. We do need to be constantly looking at that, and that's really where we're trying to provide that visibility and capability increasingly in Cloud Creator, and it's certainly a lot more that we can be adding in there, and that's in the plans. But to get the most out of cloud, you definitely need to work the cloud, not just be in the cloud, and that's where a lot of the best cost savings and capabilities come from scaling things up and down. We have organisations that absolutely make use of that. We work with a number that have very seasonal peaks, and so we get to help them scale for just a few weeks or even days of a year where they have a peak load and then scale back down. And previously they used to provision servers for those type of environments. One of them's quite prominently in the mindset at the moment with the census being done. And we certainly also work with other organisations like Racing Board that have those really seasonal peaks. So it is becoming very mainstream for organisations to make use of this. That's a very long answer to your question, sorry.
And Gareth from Azure Christchurch, you're happy to share some real-world examples where we've helped customers just do just that over the last few years. Yep. Some that did adopt early, found exactly what you said, their costs started spiralling, and the work that we've done with them to actually help them reduce those back down and get the most out of the model.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, as you touched on, a lot of people saw the initial advantages of the cloud and just saw, oh, I can save a lot of money doing this, so we're just going to throw everything up there. But as Keith said before, it's very much like a hairdryer analogy. You turn a hairdryer on, you leave it on forever. You're going to rack up a bill. It's being able to know when you can turn it off and on, which is part of that optimization piece that we talked about in terms of the adoption. So a lot of the times when we're engaging with companies, it's about the change of expectation as well, about them understanding how to utilize and maximize the capability of it. I mean, we did it quite recently with one of our clients where we developed a script. We worked quite closely with them to turn their stuff off and on during the weekends and at night when it wasn't being used, and save nearly 50% of their overall bill. So it's being able to apply those that IP and that knowledge about able to maximize the potential in order, if that is one of your drivers in terms of reducing cost. To go back to a question that was over here, yes, there are ways of doing it, but it's not as simple as I'm just going to take this and move it up there and leave it and I'm going to save lots of money. It's about being able to understand how you engineer it accordingly, which is when you can start to rely on the likes of your CCLs, your Averas, and also Cloud Creator, that tool that sits over the top. We're looking at beginning to implement and integrate a lot of that IP into that particular platform so you can understand how to use it automatically, essentially.
Any other questions?
Yes, mate.
You said earlier that Microsoft have a roadmap
Correct.
for Azure stack.
Yep.
Are you locked into that roadmap? If there was a new Azure product that your customers wanted, would you negotiate to get that on your stack, or are you really locked into the roadmap?
We get input, but yeah, obviously the way they develop and their prioritisation is their decision. But certainly as part of the program we're on, we, along with a number of other service providers around the globe, do certainly get to be involved in those discussions and help prioritise. We certainly have been quite prominent in providing feedback and particularly trying to make it relevant for the types of environment we operate in. What we have found is that Scandinavia is very similar in its kind of requirements, again, kind of a little bit geographically away from the main global public cloud data centres, which tend to be down in Germany and the UK and things. They again have quite strong sovereignty requirements. So what we have done is also worked with some of the providers in those regions to kind of lobby for the things that we think are most relevant. And there's a service provider in Finland that we've worked with over a number of years to compare notes. There, I probably shouldn't be saying that because now Microsoft will know we're
In cahoots.
in cahoots. But that does help increase our lobbying capability from just being a Kiwi-based organisation. But we do actually have a very high profile for the work we've done on this to date, which is quite cool. The other thing I should mention, and normally mention when I talk about the architecture, is that we also there is a continuous update process around all of the core platform updates that we are committed to as well. So, which ensures that we keep the capability we have in line with the public Azure, so that any new features and functionalities they do want to push out will consistently work, because we're always within a set number of update cycles of where they are at on their own code base.
So yes is the answer to that.
Thanks, Dan.
No worries. Yeah, that LEMSIP's awesome, isn't it? Any other questions? Yes, Mike.
Does your licensing model accommodate a non-profit charity tier?
That I can find out about that. So the licensing model for Azure Stack is actually a Microsoft Azure licensing model, and so I'll find out from them, but we can absolutely get back to you on that. That's a good question. I know they do in some of their other capabilities, so it's possible. You may know if they do it already for Azure. No, we'll find out for you.
Yeah. Cool.
Anything else?
If you do have any questions and you're a wee bit shy like I am, just feel free to ask your CCL representatives or your Spark or Rivera guys, and we'll get the necessary information out to you. But yeah, finally, thanks for your time.